You're listening to Season 2 of the Mies podcast. I'm your host, Josh Sharkey, the founder and CEO of Mies, a culinary operating system for food professionals. On the show, we're going to talk to high performers in the food business, everything from chefs to CEOs, technologists, writers, investors, and more, about how they innovate and operate and how they consistently execute at a high level, day after day. And I would really love it if you could drop us a 5-star review anywhere that you listen to your podcast. That could be Apple, that could be Spotify, it could be Google. I'm not picky. Anywhere works, but I really appreciate the support. And as always, I hope you enjoy the show. My guest today is the chef and owner of Stages and the Living Room in Dover, New Hampshire, Evan Hennessy. Man, this was such an awesome conversation. Evan is a James Beard semifinalist and 3-time CHOP champion. But what's really evident when you get to know him more is that he is incredibly passionate and devoted to moving the culinary industry forward and supporting up-and-coming chefs. So much so that he started a really killer program called Staging at Stages. If you don't know what staging is, it's essentially like an apprenticeship where a chef can come and work for a day or 2 days or a week, depending on how long, typically unpaid, sometimes paid. But in this case, the program, the chef comes and works alongside Evan at the restaurant for 5 days, cooking everything together. And this is not typical of a stage. Typically, you would, be peeling potatoes or, cleaning mushrooms or something for days on end. But here you're working directly alongside him, so you learn a lot. And then at the end, you create a meal of your inspiration, and 50% of the proceeds are shared with the stagiaire. So Evan and I spent a lot of time talking about the approaches to hiring and training talent and how to deal with mistakes made in the kitchen. The restaurant is really intimate, and Evan clearly loves to bring the guest and the team into the experience. And there's some really interesting ways in which he's doing that at Stages. You can learn more about the stage program in the show notes. We'll give you a link to where you can even apply if you're interested. So as always, I loved the conversation, and I hope that you enjoy the show as much as I did. We're live, by the way, so welcome to the podcast.
Yeah. Nice. Hey, hi. I love
Stoked to have you on, man. And I'm just going to kind of dig in, if that's cool.
I'm going to move locations.
Yeah, do your thing.
You can follow me through my home, give you a tour. So,
there we go.
There's my wife over there working away.
Hello.
Give you a nice outdoor. Actually, I'll show you. This is what I'm talking about. You can kind of see. That's what we're dealing with outside right now.
Oh, yeah. Gee,
Yeah.
Is that ice?
No, that's snow. And it's like some of the stuff on the deck is like kind of iced over, but it's like,
Yeah, that's
the
brutal.
dogs love it. I'll tell you that. But
Oh, yeah.
they've
Yeah,
been
my
playing around nonstop.
my dog is obsessed with the snow.
Oh, they love it. Yeah. They roll in it, they lay in it, they eat it. I mean, I would be psyched if I were a dog. He's like, all of a sudden you can start.
I know,
eating
look at all
around.
this
It's
water.
awesome.
I can have whatever I want. What kind of dog do you have?
I've got 3. The one that's right here hanging out with me. This is Ellie. So she's she's an Australian Kelpie. And then we have a blue heeler. And then we have Issa, who is a shepherd husky. She's
Awesome.
she's our little one. So
Wait, so you have, how many kids do you have?
3.
Jeez, you
Yeah. Well, one
3
is
kids and
much
3
one is much older, and then 2 are the 12 and 15.
that's nuts, man. That's nuts. Good for you.
Yeah.
We have an English bulldog, but he kind of just lays around all day.
I think I remember you were
wants to go
saying that
outside.
before. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's it's like a little baby.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. They totally are.
Well, anyways, let's dig in, man.
Yeah.
Stoked to have you on. The first thing I was actually really curious about, I don't remember if we actually talked about it, but obviously you worked at a bunch of awesome spots in New York, per se, and Cafe Ballou and Teresi, and I think you also worked in Chicago at Trio. Is that right?
Trio.
Yeah.
Correct.
And, what brought you back to New Hampshire? Because you are born and raised in New Hampshire, right? And then you left. And why'd you come back?
Oh, it's such an easy question. It's and it's one that I love to say. It's just obviously the fact that I grew up and was raised here. I love this area. I love small towns. I love the access to the mountains and the ocean. Big cities are great, but I'm definitely not a city boy at all. And I need this. I just kind of showed you the outside. It's like we have 4 acres off in the forest, and this is what I need. This is good for me.
Yeah.
And that's honestly why it was I like the way that the sort of small town New England is. It's a super great feel for me. And yeah, I need to be near the ocean and the mountains, to be able to get
I
to them
feel you,
pretty
man.
quickly.
I lived in Nantucket for a while, and I lived in Rhode Island, but I know nothing about New Hampshire. I imagine there's probably a large cohort of people in America that don't. What should we know about New Hampshire? And maybe because there's so many things, just like, what should we know about New Hampshire as it relates to the culinary landscape and then just like nature, because it sounds like it's pretty pristine.
We'll start off with nature because that's more prolific than the culinary scene is at the moment. And I mean, we're known for the White Mountains, and Mount Washington is the highest peak in elevation this side of the Mississippi. We've got tiny little coastline. It's like roughly, if you stretch it out, it's like 13 and a half miles or something like that. It's tiny.
Oh, wow.
But it's beautiful. Some sort of like combination of rocky and soft sand beaches out there, but a lot of pine forest, a lot of birch coming up this way, a decent amount of maple. That's kind of what our area looks like. I mean, we're situated in a very dense pine forest here. Culinarily, we're working on it. Where the landscape is really growing. It's very focused on the seacoast. For many, many years, that Portsmouth has been kind of known as like the epicenter of restaurants. I use the word great restaurants here and there, but they have a lot of restaurants. So that's very dense. Population of Portsmouth is maybe like 34,000 people, very transient population because they have a high tourist population that comes through in the summertime, whereas Dover, which is where stages and the living room are located, has very little tourism whatsoever. So we kind of stay right around that 33,000 mark pretty much year round. So we don't see an influx of people in the summertime, which is actually kind of nice, nor do we see it, it's sort of change and go during the winter time. But as far as again, like a concentration of restaurants that we are highly pushed in this area, there's an average variety of restaurants. A lot of restaurants fall into the category of like new American, whatever that exactly that means. And then you kind of have a couple of stragglers that pop out in kind of like the Italian side or some version of an Asian restaurant or something like that. That's kind of what we do here.
Is there
a lot of breweries
at home? What are like people that have lived in New Hampshire for, many generations? What are they cooking at home? Like what are like the staples?
Anything
honestly, particular?
Not necessarily. I mean, a pretty fair amount of people up here hunt. So, that they'll probably have that, like deer meat or whatnot quite a bit. But other than that, I mean, it's, there isn't anything that necessarily, like to me at least, that stands out.
Yeah.
There's stuff that you'll see commercially. Everybody knows about like clam chowder and lobster rolls and things like that. But, people really aren't making that kind of stuff at home.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. But and in terms of the things that are available around there, I mean, I see in your menu things like, matsutake, and I imagine there's obviously mushrooms, but like, are you getting matsutakis up there? Are there like what type of products are like, native to there?
So here's a good way to start describing that is that one of the biggest things that we actually lack is citrus. Past that, we have a lot of stuff up here. Huge diversity of mushrooms. You mentioned matsutakis, and we get everything from hen of the woods, chicken of the woods, lobsters, morels. Sometimes you'll find black trumpets are pretty prolific. Matsutakis are awesome. Varieties of oyster mushrooms, all kinds of different stuff. Cauliflower mushrooms, bear's head, lion's manes. Like those are all the wilds.
Awesome.
And so we get and chanterelles. That's another one we get. Yellowfoot and chanterelles. So tons of those. Speaks to the fact that we've got tons of forest up here. Farmland, good variety of kind of we'll call them common vegetables. Everything from potatoes, tomatoes, peppers. Eggplant. Basically, all the nightshades can thrive really well up here. Very, it's good herb country. A lot of people do well with fresh herbs, wildflowers, a lot of that. Yeah, I mean,
pretty much everything.
It's pretty much everything. That's the same. Like, it's better to describe it like to tell you first what we don't have because it's literally just citrus.
Imagine avocados.
And avocados. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But we get great fruits. I mean, we're known for our apples,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I lived in New York City for 20 some odd years with my wife, and I moved up to kind of live in the woods in northern Westchester. I had no idea just in our backyard, we have ramps, morels, chicken in the woods, chanterelles. It's crazy.
It's amazing.
And then you walk down the, block and there's, just so many types of mushrooms. Like, I can't believe that, these are all around here.
Yeah, it's so great. Ramps are awesome, man. We find those, that tiny little window in the springtime that we're able to actually find. We have a space not too far from where I live. It's all like 10 minutes from where I live. And it's a highly coveted space because they're not normally seen right around where we are. It's more sort of towards like the western side of the Appalachians. I mean, you're talking, like where you are and everything. It's like they kind of more go out in that direction than where exactly where we are.
It's crazy how many there are near me, and no one even knows. Like
That's awesome.
we were at like our one of my son's or daughter's friends, like from her class, like we were at their parents' house down the block, and it's literally just probably like a half acre of ramps everywhere. And I was like, do you know what these here? And they're like, what are those things? And I'm like, okay, I need to start a business because every house here I could just, get all these ramps, hire somebody, $18 a pound. And they're everywhere, and like literally they're everywhere around here. So anyways, you have stages in the living room up in New Hampshire. And I want stages, sorry. I keep saying stages in my head because we're going to talk about staging. So anyways, we'll get to that as well. It's been around for 12 years, right?
Just about. Yeah. We touched 12 this March, actually. It's coming soon.
Wow. So I want to hear like you talk about what the restaurant is and why. But, one thing, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. When I think back from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like I always kind of want to be embarrassed about what I was putting out 5 years ago. Otherwise, what am I, how much am I growing? But like, I'm curious, you've been doing this restaurant now, you've been doing it for 12 years. What's changed? What's evolved? Like, what are the most tangible like differences between day one and now 12 years later with the restaurant?
That's such a great question. And I honestly think about that all the time, whether somebody's asking me that directly or not. And for me, a huge thing that has changed is, we'll call it culinary maturity is a big thing. I think that I've learned to really simplify and yet bring in a more precision into the flavor, I think is a good thing. I definitely think my food has it's matured a lot. I think when we started, it was very influenced by all my experiences that, my career up until that point. And I think in a lot of times, like when you open your own restaurant, like you do see that to a fair amount. It's some version of a reproduction of stuff that you've done, in another restaurant. Like I've worked at, restaurants X, Y, and Z. And so that I'm taking all those techniques and ideas and I'm putting my version of that on the plate. And then, flash forward over a handful of years that you really learn to kind of grow out of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to say that at all. It's just that you've got to start somewhere, when it's finally your choice and your decision, that it takes time to move out of the influence of other people's choices and into your own. And to the point where you can actually put forth something that's on the plate and to say like that I completely created this all the way through. Obviously you learn techniques and things like that throughout your career, but to be able to put forth a flavor combination that you came up with is where we've gotten. That's, over the course of almost 12 years that's where we've gotten to. We've definitely moved in a more, we'll say like Scandinavian Japanese flavor profile, and not necessarily in terms of choice of I want to be that. It was simply a very simple case of just looking at a map and seeing where geographically we were and what other worlds or what other areas in the world had similar sort of agriculture and aquaculture things going on. And those just happen to be those regions. And so for us to kind of assimilate with those cultures and food styles, it just made a lot of sense.
Yeah. I imagine when you first opened, it's a lot of just taking all the things you've learned over the years and then just putting dishes out based on that. And then over time, you start to, embrace the land that you're living in, living on and the products more.
To add another huge change, I remember, this is coming out of like the per se mentality of like, there's 1,000 purveyors, for different things. And when we first opened, and even the first handful of years, I was very much stuck in the mindset of like, I get my onions from this guy and my carrots from this guy and my celery from here. And this comes from that guy. And I very quickly realized like, that's the dumbest freaking thing I've ever done in my life. Like I don't know any of these people, I know none of this stuff. And I'm literally just doing this for the bragging sake of like, look at how many purveyors I've got. And look how much I can do. Look how cool I am, And so I hone that into a very small group of people is the best way to say that. So it was just one farm we do vegetables from, another farm we do dairy, eggs, and some vegetables. There's a farm like 45 minutes from us that we are on a breeding program with. So they raise our land animals for us. And so those are the things that have taken years and years to get to that situation, to that level of relationship with different farms. And even now, starting this spring, I just had a great conversation with a tuna fisherman. And so coming this spring, he will take us out on his boat and we can show us, he's going to show us how he catches tuna, and we'll start fishing for different things with him. And my wife and I both have diving certifications. So we can actually take a big, long step off the back of his boat and pull seaweed and do, look for other things that are just slightly below the ocean surface. So there's that. We're working with an oyster farm, which my wife also works on. And so that they're harvesting oysters for us. Like, we're walking out into the water and picking our oysters, which is awesome. So again, these are the huge things that have evolved, and to the point where we are that connected with the food that we're bringing into the kitchen.
Also, just sounds like a lot of fun.
It is a ton of fun. Absolutely. Yeah.
A buddy of mine has an oyster farm in Eastern Shore, Virginia. They're Sewansicott oysters, and we go down and visit him. And we've been friends for, 20-some years. No, more than that, 35 years, I think. And it's so much fun, like going into the bay and like pulling these oysters out and just right in the boat,
right there,
pop it up in your mouth.
Yeah.
Well, can you just for anyone that doesn't know, just talk a little bit about Stages and Living Room, and what's the concept? Just maybe explain at a 50,000 foot level, like what you're doing.
We will start with the living room. So the living room is our cocktail lounge that you walk through to get to Stages. The idea behind this is it's nice and cozy. It's kind of slightly dimly lit, very warm, almost like vintage lighting. It's all couches, coffee tables, bookshelves, record player, games from my generation, like board games and things like that. I brought in most of my cookbook collection so people can take books off the shelf and hang out. We have an excellent cocktail and mocktail program. Our full beverage program is offered there. And then we do a small plates menu offered a la carte out there. People do make reservations. We don't require, but our biggest thing is like, we treat this restaurant as our home. And when you come into somebody's home, what's the first room that you get to? The living room. So we want you to sit down, hang out, relax, and feel very comfortable, and enjoy, first off, the company that you're with. And then we will highlight that with a selection of food and beverage. Walking through the living room, you get to Stages, which is the 6-seat, we'll call it kitchen table or chef's counter, that's actually in the kitchen back there. So you can see everything that's going on. I mean, we literally are plating, 3 feet from you. So you get to see all parts of everything going on, the creation, the cooking, the plating, all the fire calls for any food going out to the living room. So you get a very behind the scenes look of not just how your food is put together, but how like a kitchen in a restaurant runs, which is pretty cool.
I always tell my wife, like, the best experience I could think of would be like either I end a meal before I start a meal is I can sit on a couch and have a cocktail.
Yeah.
Like sitting in the chair, in a hard chair, it's fine when you go to a cocktail bar, but like having like a couch and a table and just leaning back, like there's nothing better than that. So what a great way to, to start the meal.
When our guests have reservations for Stages, that we actually, when they arrive, we seat them in the living room. We say crush them with snacks, but like we do this almost overwhelming spread of like little hand bites and small snacks and tiny little plates of things. And we just cover their table with cool flavors. And it's a great opening flavor wise for them so they can kind of see what they're getting into. But then, it's just let them get situated and make them feel comfortable, and then just kind of relax and hang out in the living room before we bring them into the kitchen. And then they continue the tasting menu in there.
It's awesome. I want to spend a lot of time talking about like your process of working with the team, but maybe to tee it up, we can talk a little bit about your new program with staging. And I think, the idea of staging, I think, has sort of, changed a lot over the last decade. I mean, it's been around since probably the 1800s, right? Like apprenticing in restaurants, because there was no other way to do it. But yeah, I would love for you to, because you're so deep in it, talk a little bit about just staging in general. So everybody, is aware. I think most people probably know. And then just talk about your program a bit.
So I guess going into the history of it, whether it's considered a stage or an apprenticeship or anything, is that you as a cook or an aspiring cook are basically donating your time to learn at a restaurant for an unspecified amount of time. Some restaurants have, obviously, it's set up for a duration, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be. But the idea is that you're going in there unpaid and are going to do, and I think a lot of people expect this, almost the most tedious, marginally meaningless, tasks, and then asked to stand to the side during a service and to watch. Whereas their core team has everything so dialed in that bringing in, kind of an unknown set of hands into the mix can rock the boat a little bit. So usually you just get to watch. And a lot of people romanticize that and saying like, oh, it's cool, so cool. It's like, I really get to watch. I get to see how this kitchen is, and I get to watch how this Michelin starred kitchen is, and I get to, do that. But yeah, you're just watching, which awesome, really cool. But what I'm offering is slightly different. So I am asking for 5 days of the chef's time, and they are 100% integrated into our team. They will be given prep lists. They'll be working with myself, my sous chef, going through all the prep, getting ready for service. They will be in every single piece of service, serving our guests, talking with our guests. And then with an underlying idea is that they themselves are going to create, with my guidance, 3 dishes of their own, which would be of the level that we would present at Stages anyways. And that they will sit down and present them to a sort of a closed group of 12 guests sat in the living room. And they'll have the opportunity per dish to really talk through their process of how they got to that point, a little bit about themselves, but more so how they got to that combination of flavors, why they created this dish, what their idea, when they would serve this throughout a menu, and how the whole thing works. And then they get immediate feedback and reaction from our guests. And it's a very open, honest conversation, which is awesome, because not in hardly ever in a restaurant setting do you get open and honest feedback from a guest right then. So often it's like they wait until they get home and have had another glass of wine, and they get on Yelp, and then they tell you what they really thought about your restaurant. So this is a great opportunity for these people these chefs, whatnot, to sit down with our guests and really chat through a process. And my hope is that both guest and chef will learn more about themselves as a cook or a diner, but then also how to improve their process and their cooking and their technique. And therefore it's very much, it's also like a pay it forward thing, so that they take everything that they've learned while with us at Stages, and then they can bring that back to their own establishments. And hopefully that starts affecting, bigger picture, it starts affecting the industry as a whole. Smarter decisions are made. Food in the industry, hopefully as a whole, gets, the levels up a little more. It's just, I'm really hoping to help build and influence the industry from within. I really want to work with the younger generation of people and give them guidance, so that when it's their turn to make choices as a chef, they have more of a foundation for it.
Yeah, and I love that. I'm really curious, like who is this person? Who's a typical person that would do this stage? Because it sounds like it probably isn't someone who's like incredibly green, right? Because if you're, creating your dish and talking about why you might need some semblance of experience, but like, what's the vetting process, and who's like the ideal persona of who's doing the stage?
That's such a great question, and it really is like, I really wish that I could take everybody and anybody, because everybody who has applied deserves this opportunity for sure. But as you said, somebody who's super green, it would definitely help that they've had more dish creation experience, or just more overall cooking experience. It expands their level of technique and flavor building. So I will say the best candidate was kind of like the middle of the road, and that's got a huge window within it. Somebody who has some experience, but hasn't been the head chef or executive chef for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
That person,
That's what I figured. It's interesting too, because and I think you and I might have talked about this when we first started chatting, was there's knowledge is now much more of a commodity than it ever was, because of, the internet and things like that. But just knowing, going on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, you find these things and seeing how to do something is not enough, right? And you have to have this experience. And part of that experience is what you're talking about with this kind of stage, which is incredible. And then part of it is also there's a value to doing something repetitively. I remember staging at Danielle, on, my day off, and I think I spent 3 hours just cleaning mousserone mushrooms.
Right. Yeah.
I remember asking the chef, okay, what's the fastest way to do this? And he said, start. Cool. I was like, got it. And, there's something to that, because in cooking, in any craft really, right, there's the technical piece of it, but then there's also the psychological and the emotional piece of it. You have to have durability, and you have to have resilience, and you have to have the callous of knowing that this is not just having really good ideas, and this is not just, being able to make something look pretty on a plate, but you have to be able to do this consistently over a long period of time. And it's not just mental, it's physical, both those things. And that's something to learn. And I think that's probably takes longer to learn. Is there any part of, it sounds like with the type of stage that you're doing, the purpose and approach is probably more for like, hey, you've gotten that part already, and now we want you to start to, see what your food and your, and your ideas look like to the public. It sounds like that's more of kind of the approach that you're taking, right?
Yeah. And you actually just said something just that I really wanted to hone in on is that, there's so many ideas out there and so many different things. And one of the biggest things that I really want to help cooks and chefs do is to take that massive information, those little bits and pieces of things that they know how to do, and really hone them in. And so that they're making smart choices for the plate. And then, again, to like, how do you take an idea and understand if it's feasible, flavor-wise, logistically, financially? Does it work within your menu structure where your guests like it? Are you making something just because you think it's cool or because it's a trend or whatever it is? Or are you putting forth like a stupidly solid plate of food that your guests are really going to identify with? And I've seen this in so many cooks, especially, the younger ones, like they're, like you said, is like whatever's on the internet or social media, there's just so many things out there and so many ideas that they're like, I want to do it all and I want to do it all right now. And so the menus and the food that they put together can tend to be these highly disjointed ideas. It's like you took all the puzzle pieces and put them together in the wrong order, but realizing instead of a 100-piece puzzle, you literally need 3 pieces to put this together. Just do them really, really well. I think that's going back to what I spoke to before about like, my maturing as a cook, that you learn to filter, you learn to really understand your flavor and why it's actually there. What influence it has with the other textures and flavors that are on the plate. That's only one piece of the puzzle. Obviously, you need to be able to put this forth to a guest, and they have to be able to understand the idea that you put on the plate without you going through a 20-page explanation of like, this is where I come from, and this is what it is, and this is what I was feeling. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, I don't want to say like nobody cares, but it's like, you should be able to convey. I mean, talk about, like every dish is like an elevator speech, right? Like you've got 20 seconds of time to capture your audience's attention with a holy shit, that's amazing. And whether that's, a 28-ounce, ribeye chop or, that's, a tiny little piece of something on a spoon, like you've got to capture that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm hoping to hone in.
No, it's so true. I feel like we could talk about this for hours.
Oh yeah, it's a great topic.
I feel like there's an arc of every chef that wants to do something great where inevitably, no matter what, in some part, usually early in your career, and then it ends, is like, there is a narcissistic piece of what we do where like, because there's so much instant gratification where you just start doing things because they're cool and you want to, get a reaction. And, I think one of the hardest things is to like have constraint as you mature as an artisan, right? So like when you're at this stage of your career, you don't understand well enough how to execute this thing, but you can execute something simpler. And if you could keep that constraint as you grow, then your food is going to continually be delicious. But you have to be mindful of what your constraints are. Not just, there's also of course like economical constraints, but like we as chefs, like the way that you're able to airze a piece of fish, 20 years into your career and 2 years into your career is just different. And there's not much you can, it's hard to explain it, but it's just different. And, that constraint is like is so important. And I feel like it does often, get lost.
It really is. I think there's a huge thing. You keep alluding to this, which is awesome, which is why it's such a great conversation, where it's like, as you're learning, you're trying to run as fast as you go and your feet are moving so fast. And as you progress through your career, you realize that you can make longer strides with less effort. That you really simplify what you're doing. And you go from looking like, trying to come up with an animal reference where it's just, you got legs going everywhere, feet going everywhere, and you're trying to run in every different direction, down to the point where you're just this graceful animal kind of just gently moving across the plains. And that the elder is moving very efficiently, seamlessly, effortlessly, efficiently, but still getting to the end result and producing, much better. It's probably the worst analogy in the world, but
This show is brought to you by, you guessed it, Mies. Mies helps thousands of restaurants and food service businesses all over the world build profitable menus and scale their business successfully. If you're looking to organize your recipe IP and train your team to put out consistent product every day in less time than ever before, then Mies is just for you. And you can transform all those old Google Docs and Word docs and PDFs and spreadsheets and Google Sheets into dynamic, actionable recipes in Meez in lightning speed. Plus, stop all that manual work of processing invoices because Meez will digitize all your purchases automatically. And there's a built-in database of ingredient yields, prep yields, and unit of measure conversions for every ingredient, which means you're going to get laser-accurate food costs in a fraction of the time. Visit www.getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com to learn more. And check out the show notes moving forward because we're going to be adding promotions and discount codes so that all of you lovely and brilliant Meez podcast listeners get a sweet deal on Meez. It reminds me of, I had a meal in Brooklyn. This was years ago, and I don't remember the name of the restaurant. I'm glad I don't because, it was one of those sort of when Scandinavian food was getting really big and they were being very avant-garde with the food. And there was like a sous vide flat iron steak with like some sort of caramelized leek and everything. The idea was great, right? And they sous vide it perfectly, actually. But then they cut it with the grain. It was like so chewy. And I'm like, it doesn't matter how many cool techniques you have. There's some, learn the fundamentals and then you can grow from there. And I think you see it all the time. And I don't know if there's a way to get around it when you're a young cook or any really craft. I think it's just something that you just start to play around with. But if you have somebody as a mentor that can help you like have that restraint, it goes a long way.
And I think in many ways too, it's like, and a million people have said is like, you have to go through that. Not necessarily say it's like a rite of passage, but you've got to go through all those like weird ideas and, failures and all that other stuff in order to actually learn the true ways to like how food works.
Yeah.
To use your example, like, why wouldn't you cut it that way? Well, what if you turned your knife slightly differently? Or it's just like, man, maybe I should not cut it with the grain, just little things like that like, you're all about that, the fancier technique or like, look at what I put on top or, I turned olive oil powder. It's like, cool. You still can't cut your steak right. And your brunoise sucks.
Yeah. And stories and ideas are important, but
100%.
They have to be delivered with like also, great food. Because you're starting this program with staging and because of your career, I have to imagine that you have a pretty interesting, maybe not novel, but at least a pretty smart approach to training and sort of mentoring your cooks. And we were talking about knowledge as a commodity and because now it's so available. So I'm curious, like how you think about like the advantages and disadvantages of a cook that's starting their career today versus when you started, your career decades ago.
A huge difference between those two eras that I can actually call it that, is literally the internet. Well, like when I started cooking, there wasn't looking things up on the internet and websites and social media didn't exist. So I had my nose in books. That I was constantly studying like Charlie Trotter's books, Jacques Pepin. And like, those were the books that my nose where it was constantly crammed into to learn technique and flavor. And then I guess at that point, like avant-garde flavor or just like creative, like the fact that like Trotter was putting, meat sauces with vegetables, people were like, well, you can't do that. So we're breaking boundaries kind of at that point. Flash forward to, now is that there's with the internet, everything, there's just so many ideas. And I have this wonderful CDP on my staff who is just a hair over 21 years old, just, graduated culinary school. And he is the epitome of like the excited cook. He's so in it, so dialed in, absolutely loves it. Like works on recipes at home, is constantly, asking questions. It's literally just like, I love it. As a teacher, it's like, I absolutely love his drive. And he knows this. I'm not like talking behind his back right now. It's, is to hone in those thoughts. Is to really dial those in. And I think that is a huge part. And he's mentioned this, and he and I have this great conversation, like just constantly, just ongoing, conversations about it, about it's awesome to have all these ideas and I want you to have them. I don't want you to stop thinking in the way you are because it's the way that your mind works. And I appreciate that. What we're working on is taking those 100 ideas and it's like a self-filter, being able to figure out like what actually works. Why would it work? Where would it go? What does it have a place with? This leads into something that we actually have in the kitchen. We have 3 huge whiteboards up in the kitchen, and it's a dual process, meaning one that we want our guests to see into our thought process. How do we create dishes? How do we create things?
Oh, that's cool.
We want people to see literally behind the scenes. We first start with the idea, and the idea is like, does it have a purpose? And this satisfies the idea of you're not just creating a project for creating a project. How many times have you been in a kitchen and in a stage or an intern comes up with like this half deli of like, mashed up chives. It's like, chef, I got you, here's your chives and here's the scrap. I thought maybe we could create this little oil and we could do this. And you're like, don't give me another project, because then you're just creating projects for projects. But everything needs to have a purpose. So if we're creating, like we have an arsenal of garums going right now, which is great. Do we know what that will end up being? No, but we know that within our food that those things will all have a purpose. And so we're creating with that. That has to satisfy the first idea. And then we move into, does it have a purpose? Like, where is it going to go? And then we start morphing into, like, we can start possibly combining it with other flavors. And we haven't even built the dish yet. We're literally just saying, okay, we've got this beautiful scallop garum that could possibly go with like a maitake mushroom over the fire. Like if we just glaze it with that, stop the idea right there. Just put that on paper. And so it goes up on the whiteboard. And then we move it into where its final possible destination would be, is to we start placing it. Meaning then we start really bringing the dish together. And that's pulling these little flavor pieces of which we've created, 2 thought processes ago. Now they start to come in. And this is literally the out in the open thought process on how we get to a dish. And I thought it's our best way to organize a lot of these things so that, if you see it up on a whiteboard or on just sort of out in the open, I guess, then you're constantly walking by it. Not only are you always thinking about it because you're seeing it, but it really helps you to hone in on those ideas and how to manifest that.
I love that. It's great too, because it's sort of a microcosm of what is so important with just starting any business as well. And this is just sort of a second order of that, is just making sure you know why you're doing it, because it's so easy to get lost and start adding all kinds of other things and layering on top and getting overcomplicated because you forgot why you're actually doing the thing.
Right.
It's so smart.
Yeah, you get so far off the actual mark that you're like, I don't even know what I was doing in the first place. Yeah.
Well, speaking of like that cook and any cook, I'm curious. Like I have this like, my team probably it gets annoyed because I say it so often, but I have this philosophy that every mistake that happens in a business is, well, it's my fault, right? As the owner, and then that trickles down, right? Because there's only 4 things that could have gone wrong. Either I hired the wrong person for the wrong role, I didn't train them well, I didn't manage them the way they need to be managed, or I didn't inspire them the right way. And anytime something goes wrong, it tends to be one of those things. There's very few like just bad apples in the entire world.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like how you think about hiring a team. Granted, I know it's just hard to hire and find people, but like the right experience versus someone that you are so clear that you could nurture this person and train them the right way, and how much of that is on you versus on them being able to, absorb it.
Sure. That's such a great question. And literally that responsibility falls in all those categories. That it starts with me, that when we make it known that we're hiring for a certain position, at that point before even having a conversation with an incoming cook or chef, that I kind of already know what I need as a person and as a talent level in that role. And there's the flex within that, because I know that obviously that I can, teach up to what I need to be accomplished. But even with that, it's like that cook now needs to come to the table with, they already need to come to the table with a certain experience level so that they can comprehend what it is that I need them to do. They need to have like at least a sense of the bigger picture, not just like, I'm a great cook, please give me a chance. That person right there, I'm a great cook, please give me a chance, is one of the last people that I would hire. I really look for people who want to grow, want to learn, have good worldly experience, or at least have their mind on that. They understand that there's a bigger picture, that there's more than just their station, involved in the operation. They understand, at least for me specifically, that we're a tiny little team. So that the way that the person that I'm looking for has to fit, like really has to fit. And it's not always the person with, the gigantic Michelin-starred restaurant, nor is it, the person who's, fresh out of high school, just hoping to get their first job. It's somewhere in the mix of all that. And, you could have an incredible amount of high-end experience and be like an egotistical asshole. You could also have all the same experience and be like the most chillest dude I've ever met. That's the guy that I'm gonna hire. It's because you need to not only gel with me and with the team, but you need to be able to work with our guests and talk with them and speak with them and be able to have conversations. Many ways, like, very candidly and very openly, because they're going to ask you like all kinds of stuff. And I need you to be able to handle that. So my requirements are very different from what the next chef's or next restaurant's requirements.
Yeah. How do you identify that? Like, how do you interview for that?
It's a conversation. Much like you and I, are having, right? It's like, I hire you. It's just like, it really is. Like, I kind of have a guideline as to what I'd like to know. And some of that is reflected in the application that we have for the staging program. It's like, I love to know generally what your experience is. And one of the things I'd love to know is what is, have you traveled? Where's your favorite places? To be, what do you do on your days off? What is your favorite restaurant and why? And I'm not necessarily looking for like, oh, I've been to Le Bernardin and it was, it's like, no. Like legit, what's your favorite restaurant and why? And because I want to know how they connect with food.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm looking for out of that question. If your connection with food is that it looks cool and you appreciate formal service, like I don't really know if, you're going to fit in here because it's too rigid.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that that's wrong. I haven't interviewed any wrong people. I need to know that I can have a conversation with that person about anything at any point.
Yeah.
Whether, they did something wrong, something's really messed up with the restaurant, whatever the conversation may be, that I can walk up to that person, we can talk about it.
Yeah, it sounds like the right aspiration is far more important than the right experience. It's funny, it reminds me of, a couple of things. There's Zappos, I don't know if they still do it, but they used to, if a candidate got far enough along in the interview process, they would offer them like $5,000 not to take the job. And it was their way of clearly identifying people that didn't want it enough. And it cost them some money, but oftentimes, it costs more money to train,
totally.
new people that leave. And then there's, we at Mies, before this thing called the A method of hiring, it was just it's a methodology that I learned from this coach of mine. I mean, there's a whole, I can put it in the show notes, but one thing that I found really profound was that most people get wrong is that they just hire a good person and they're not super clear on what is it specifically that I want the results of this person to do. Like, what results do I want out of them? Not what's the job description and like what is this person supposed to do it because of the role, but like what result do I need for my company? And then get really specific about that, create a scorecard so that when you're interviewing people, you're not, you're looking for specifically why they would drive those results. And in this case, if the result is, the interaction with the customers and things like that, and the experience that you drove, then that conversation is probably far more valuable than where have you worked and do you know how to brunoise a shallot.
I mean, I've had quite an assortment of people that have come through the kitchen, and we've had, there was a gentleman that worked for me. He did an internship out of high school, and literally within the first 10 minutes of working with somebody, if they are something special.
Oh yeah.
And this guy, like, I worked with him. I was like, this guy is like, I'm not going to lose track of this kid. He worked for me for a while, finished high school and everything, stayed on full time. And then eventually went to CIA to continue culinary education, came back on his breaks and just like worked, stepped into the kitchen and we worked in seamlessly, graduated from school. And then he went to Next in Chicago, started there. And he's at Alinea right now. And we're constantly chatting. In fact, when he comes home on break, like for breaks or things like that, like we go out rock climbing together. And that's just like that kid literally came from like next to no experience whatsoever. But there was just something inside that I was like, I know this guy has got something in there that I want to work with and I want to cultivate and I'm not going to lose track of. And so, here we are just a couple of years down the line. And he and I are in great communication and everything. And he literally texted me at various points in the night, like, chef, I'm so tweaked out right now. It's like service was so hard today. It's like this, I don't know if I'm drowning or like what's going on. And like, and then we have a great conversation about, like, slow it down, break it down, what's going on and how is that. And we talk through that, which is great. And like, that's the kind of person that I love to work with, is that right there.
Yeah, I love that. And those relationships are so important. Someone doesn't have to come work for you right away. That who knows, he might run your restaurant in 10 years.
Exactly. And that's the thing is like, to go back to the staging thing or just the industry as a whole, is that there is, whether we're speaking about my restaurant or just anybody else's restaurant, is like, we are a piece of a much bigger puzzle. The better, in my opinion, that we can affect that whole puzzle, the better the industry as a whole does. And therefore food is better, morale is better, physical, mental, everything is just better. We have better restaurants come on the scene, it all just helps.
Yeah, 100%. You said something the last time we spoke that I really want to sort of double click on because I think about it so much, just in terms of how to get the team to execute. And when you were at Per Se, you said something along the lines of like they've mechanized so many of the dishes. So the cooks don't really learn. They just kind of like follow paint by numbers kind of thing.
Right.
And, you know, I think about this a lot because consistency is one of the most important things in any like restaurant, right? So if guests want to know like they're going to get the same thing when they come back. So you have to, how do you balance providing like autonomy of thought in the execution of the food with your team with also creating the right systems so that things are always consistent for the guest? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So first and foremost, we have a recipe book. You know, everything is, we reverse weigh everything down to grams so that we know exactly. So when we create something, because obviously when you create a new idea, new dish, new flavor, whatever it is, like you have no idea how many grams of this or how many grams of that it's going to take. So we cook initially in a very free-flowing method, but yet reverse weigh everything. So when we get to that end result, we knew that it took 317, grams of dashi. It took, 2.5 grams of this. And so that we have that measurement all dialed in. When we get to that very, very fluidly thought dish. And from there, so now we've created this recipe, we make it again. And so every time we weigh it out, you're obviously you're tasting everything all the way through the entire way, all the way down to like before it hits the plate. And then there's this, and we literally have conversations all the way through service, like continuously throughout service. Everybody's tasting sauces. And I'm always very adamant about that. It's like, just because a sauce or a component or a vegetable, whatever comes off my station, everybody tastes it all the time. So that way, all of us, all the palates in the kitchen are on the same page constantly so that we know exactly flavor-wise what we're looking. Recipes are awesome as guidelines. Flavor memories and taste memories are huge because an ingredient changes throughout the year. When you work with, constantly changing, obviously, an environment, but, a carrot today is not a carrot tomorrow, is not a carrot next week. So that has to be taken into effect of like, if you're looking for a desired sweetness, say we're making like carrot molasses, right? So the sugar content of a carrot picked at one part of the year is not the same as the sugar content picked at a different part of the year. So our recipe, therefore, not to say is null and void, but it has to be able to flex within that because we understand that, okay, well, you need to add some kind of a sugar here. Do we have a beet sugar that we could add to that? Like whatever it may be, like we have to constantly be so dialed in to those things. And that's how we create those consistencies.
Yeah.
Within it. So it really is, to answer the question, it's like, it's a combination of both and it has to be for us.
Yeah. It's such a sticky but interesting conversation because, at scale, that just doesn't happen, right? You have a restaurant with 150 locations. Mm-hmm. Of course, an Idaho potato in September is very different from an Idaho potato in, in July, no matter where you're buying them from. Right. And the same thing goes for the bricks level of a pear and things like that. You have to have a base. Anybody that says like, we don't use recipes, I'm like, I'm sorry, dude, you're like, good luck. You have to sort of base, if you don't have like some sort of semblance of like, yes, this nuoc cham is 20 grams of garlic and, 20 grams of shallot and like, you don't have anywhere to start. And so, you need that. It's funny. I remember Cesar at Boulé saying this like many years ago. He's like, we need to start a school on just seasoning because the minute you make something, it starts to change, especially things that are liquid that sit, right? You make a sauce. If you're keeping it warm, it's immediately changing, right? It's slowly starting to reduce a little bit. And all those things are, and like, how do you re-season it? And what is it supposed to taste like? What's the viscosity supposed to be? That is such a hard thing to create process for, as opposed to just creating people that understand that. Is that, do you feel like that takes just someone being with you long enough to know the flavor profiles and like how to, season the food the way that you're trying to achieve and the tactics that you guys use? Or is that something that people just innately know?
I'm hoping that they would come to the table with a level of understanding of that. But then the other part is just us constantly working together to dial in what it is that we're looking for, with the understanding of whatever that element is, that this is its effect on the rest of the dish. And this is why this has this amount of salt or vinegar or whatever it may be in it. But yeah, a lot of that is, going back to what I was saying, was just, it's everybody constantly communicating and being on the same page. It's not about right or wrong. It's about constant communication and staying current with exactly what is happening.
Yeah. Do you have a forum for that? How do you, is that just a pre-shipped every day? Like, how do you like create that sort of medium for conversation with the team?
it's weird because I know a lot of people will do like, yeah, pre-shift meetings and things like that. And it's like, ours just kind of happen randomly or impromptu. And it's, sometimes like the beginning of the day, like, or whatever, like if I walk into the kitchen, sometimes I have like, I have note cards everywhere. It's like, it's insane. Like here are the things that I want to discuss, and, that we go through that kind of stuff. And then the rest of it is just going up to, all the way up to service when you're getting sauces, lined up and everything. So everybody's tasting all the sauces. And yeah, it's not necessarily that. I mean, there's, discussion on like any allergies or menu adjustments or anything like that we, out of place things that we have to do, or that conversation starts from like minute one and goes all the way through the last guest at the table.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're thinking about sort of motivating your team, if we asked one of your cooks today why they work at Stages or Living Room, what do you think they would say?
I think the biggest thing is that, at least I hope this is what they would say, is that I create an atmosphere where they feel like they belong and they're safe, that they feel that they learn constantly, so that they are open to that conversation that we were just talking about, that they're comfortable to bring a thought, an idea, a dish idea, or whatever, to me. And Yundi, my sous chef, said to me the other day, just totally out of the blue, she's like, I just wanted to tell you that I really appreciate that when I bring an idea for a dish to you, that you don't just say no, or no, we're not going to do that. That you literally you stop everything you're doing and you talk it through with me. And if the end result is, no, we're not going to do that, we at least have discussed why and how we can evolve that idea into possibly something that we could use later if we're not using it now.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably, I hope that's what they would say.
Yeah. I love that, man.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when someone makes a mistake? Like, how do you handle it?
Yeah. So this is something that actually that I learned, actually, that I saw it per se, and I thought it was great. There's one small exception, is like, I don't yell at people. Is that when a mistake is made, that whoever it is that has made the mistake, that basically the entire team kind of comes over and talks about it. This is what was wrong. This is the adjustment we're going to make. And this is the direction we're going. That way, again, it's not about this person screwed up, and they don't feel, pulled out of the crowd or pulled out of line. They don't feel chastised. They don't feel down about themselves. They understand that something went wrong. They may have caused it, but there's something went wrong, and that this is how we're going to fix it. And this is what we're going to do in the future to avoid that. I mean, it's a restaurant and it's a kitchen, and sometimes waste happens. As much as you don't want that to occur, it's kind of it's a part of the game. Like, if you're getting into a restaurant, and you're going to cry and scream about every little particle of something that somebody screws up, I was like, dude, pick another career. Because that's just part of the game.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's like, I choose not to cry about that. And like, the bigger thing is getting it right. That's more important.
Yeah. I think about this all the time, especially with my team, and a lot of people on my team, because I run a tech company now, not a restaurant anymore.
Yeah.
They know way more about what they do than I do, which is a very different world. And I think, we have expectations of what we want. And as, in the kitchens for a very long time, it's starting to change. It was wrong, you get yelled at. Right. And I think I do a 360 review every year. One of the biggest outcomes this year that I learned was that I don't ask why enough when things go wrong. And it goes back to what I was saying about, like, anything that goes wrong, I think is ultimately my fault, right? Like, I either didn't hire the right person, or, I didn't train them well or manage them well, and they're not inspired. And so when someone makes a mistake, now I try to step back, and I have to I have a note card for this, like, ask why, because I usually, my normal mode would just be to talk about why it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And now I stop and say, hey, why did you do that? Right. What happened? What was going through your mind? What were you thinking about? What happened to that day? Yeah. And then that helps me understand, like, okay, maybe I wasn't clear enough about the process, or maybe I didn't set up the right environment for this to happen, or I wasn't clear enough about principles or process, or maybe I thought this was the right person for this thing and it wasn't. And it sucks, by the way.
Yeah.
When you realize, like, oh yeah, everything is kind of your fault.
Yeah.
But, that asking of why, I think has been so helpful for me, of like understanding why, it's not just my perception of what went wrong, but maybe there's something else at play. Anyways, that was a tangent, but
I think that I go into a lot of those things not with the idea that, like, I know everything and I'm right. That's how I start with a lot of that stuff. And that's one of the benefits of having sort of that group discussion versus just that one-on-one discussion, Whereas like, let's pretend I don't know, you burned an onion. What's a simple example, right? You burned an onion. And so I walk up to, that cook and or, it says, chef, I burnt the onions. Like, all right, so what did you do? How did you cut them? What was the oven temperature? You break through all the process of it. And then it's like, well, what can we do different so that that doesn't happen? Is it a simple mechanism like you forgot to set a timer or, that kind of thing, like whatever it may be, but you allow anybody in that group to have the right answer. Ultimately, I give the check mark saying like, yes, that's what we're going to go with. But I absolutely open the floor to like anybody at any moment could have the right answer. It's not just me. And that's how I learn, not just as a cook, but as a person and as a leader, that at any moment, somebody could have that right answer. And if I'm not open to that, or if I shut down anybody else's ideas, we will never achieve forward progress. It'll just be like a singular line.
Yeah. What I took away from our first conversation was it's really clear that obviously you make really delicious food and you have a really great restaurant, but that you're thinking a lot about just not just how to make great food, but how to move our industry forward. And I think that this stage program that you're creating is just going to make you that much better of a leader and a stalwart in the industry. So I'm really super stoked that you're doing it.
Oh, me too. It's a win-win. Not only do the cook coming in will get something out of it, but I also, I guess selfishly, but like, I also get something out of it. Like I learn more about mentorship and how to help others and how to progress. And every person that will walk through our kitchen door to do this is going to help me evolve this program, which is awesome.
Can you just share a little bit about what everyone should know about how to apply, how to learn more about the program?
Yeah. So we put up a post on my Instagram and the Stages Instagram, and then I have a link in my Instagram bio to get to the application for it. We break down the program into 4 quarters throughout the year, and it's a Google form. So click on the link in the bio on my Instagram. It'll take you there. It's a handful of questions. A lot of it is the stuff that we've kind of discussed throughout this conversation. And then just hit submit. It's not a stack of papers on my desk. It's like I go through every one of these like so meticulously and to the point where it's like I feel like I kind of know this person. And so that's kind of how they get involved in it. I was super, super thrilled and beyond words at not just the volume of people that applied, but the geographical range from where they applied. It was everybody from a few people coming from Dover or just like a surrounding town. A handful from like New York, upstate New York, handful from New Jersey, Portland, Maine, Minnesota. It's like people are applying from kind of, we'll say so far the east side of the country, which is awesome. And that to me, and again, like going back to when you and I had talked before, it's like that so many times that right now, the younger generation of the restaurant industry is being written off as like, there's nobody there. Who's going to take over? What's the next thing? Everybody's quitting. Everybody's leaving the kitchen. And it's like, man, I'm here to tell you that those people are out there. They absolutely are. And they want to learn and they want to move and they want to be heard. And I'm beyond psyched to be able to offer something, that platform.
Yeah. Maybe just at a high level, the mechanics of it. So it's 5 days.
Yep.
And I think they get a meal, right? They get to eat at the restaurant after the end.
Correct. Yeah. So their first night will be, and this is going to be depending on the exact schedule that we lay out, but we will say within that time frame, they will be a guest of ours in the kitchen. They'll go through the whole thing, come in and start in the living room and then move into the kitchen. They'll experience that. They'll be part of our, prep day. They'll be part of the service through the whole thing, with the ending goal that their final day will be this presentation to guests in the living room.
That's awesome.
They will walk away with 50% of the profit of that evening. So again, it's not an unpaid thing that we very much
honestly,
value
like if you
time.
think about, your typical sauce is just unpaid. This one, you're getting to eat at the restaurant, which most of the time you pay if that happens.
Right, correct, yeah.
And then also you're getting to appreciate 50% of the income from the menu items. So you're actually probably making money off of this.
You're making money. Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to wrap up here. I don't know if you think about this, but, fast forward 5-10 years from now, what stages and living room like, where are you going to be at?
It's always a hard question to answer.
And I know I hate this question, by the
way. I got one of these in culinary school, like the business class, and I totally ripped it to shreds. And I answered the question of why I shouldn't have to answer that. I got an A on the paper. But for me, it's continual growth. I do have my eye in, other projects in the works, and that's kind of as far as that I can publicly go with that. But for me, it's constant growth. I do truly hope that the living room and stages will always be there, and continue to evolve and change and grow as I do, and be a constant, positive training ground.
Yeah.
For chefs and for food and whatnot. But as a chef, it's like the ultimate goal isn't just to get to the role of chef and be like, that's it, I did it. It's like my career needs to evolve as well. So that as I've achieved, being a chef and now, the owner and the chef of the restaurant. And so it's like, my idea is like, what more can I do? Like, what are the other parts of my career that I want to grow into? And, again, like we'll see how the staging thing and sort of like, I love the idea of mentorship. I absolutely love it. We'll see kind of what direction that takes. And then, I do have, again, like I said, like got my hands in some other projects.
Yeah.
That are not too far off.
I don't know if you think about this, and this is not leading the witness by any means, but I think that there's some great culinary schools out there, but
yeah.
And then they sort of do externships, but I think the externship is actually what the school should be.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about stages turning into something more than a stage in some sort of school?
Big time. And actually, like, not to say my problem with culinary school, but like it's the issue of like that, we'll call it the institutional side of the education, where it's like, there's this pre-programmed format and like these checklist things you need to learn. It's just like, there's so much more out there that I think that should be taught. It's an excellent question because I don't exactly know what that would look like. I love the idea of it. I love that it would evolve into something bigger. I just don't know what that is yet. And I think I need to let this happen for a bit to kind of give some kind of shape right now. Right now, it's kind of just floating cloud of like possibilities. And over the course of time, that will start to take shape. And as far as like, when that hits the ground, what that will look like, I'm not totally sure.
Well, that's awesome to hear, right? Because now you have a lot to explore with this program. So
yeah, no, I think that's great. It's a good problem.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, is there anything else you want to share with this audience?
Take the puzzle apart, but put it back together a different way. Really look at the industry as a whole. Hope to look outside your own box. And as the industry is changing quickly and has changed so much in the past 5 years, how can we as a collective group really help it? You as your small little piece in the puzzle, and then how your small little piece affects everything else. What can we do that can really make restaurants special to us and this industry really grow in a great and positive way? That's what I really want to see.
I love that, man. That's a great place to end. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah, I
appreciate the time. The snow's not going away, but
we got a little while. Yeah, we're just getting started.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning into the Mies podcast. The music from the show is a remix of the song Art Mirror by an old friend, hip-hop artist, Fresh Daily. For show notes and more, visit getmees.com/podcast. That's GETMEEZ.com/podcast. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you can share it with fellow entrepreneurs and culinary pros, and give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Keep innovating, don't settle, make today a little bit better than yesterday, and remember, it's impossible for us to learn what we think we already know. See you next time.